Hey, this is Dr. C here. Today we're going to talk about immunity and vaccines. Right up to date on everything. I want to have it so that you can understand it. I'm going to take 2 minutes though to start out. Again, I'm talking to seniors. You've got to understand that seniors are at the greatest risk for getting COVID and dying from it. Please keep that in mind. You're not going to hear a lot about the effect on seniors from the press or politicians. Just like, and I'll explain that in the vaccines, you're not going to hear about the side effects from the vaccines. So I want to emphasize 94% in Massachusetts of the deaths from COVID are in seniors. Keep that in mind. And in the country, it's 80% of the deaths are seniors. Please keep it in mind. Also, the symptoms from the COVID are different in seniors than they are in the younger population. For example, in seniors, it may simply be some mental confusion. They would call it maybe a delirium, something of that nature. Or they may just be sleeping a lot more than normal. Or they may get dizzy and fall a little easier than usual. They may get dehydrated because they're not drinking enough because they feel weak. They may also lose, of course, their smell or taste, but that's not the major symptom. So remember, symptoms are different. You are at greater risk, and we'll talk about the vaccine in a moment. So, okay, let's get on with it. In order to understand vaccines, you got to understand your immune system. Now, what is immunity? Immunity is just your body's ability to recognize what is part of you, in other words, self and non-self. That's basically it. You can identify self from non-self. So, where do we go? The immune system then, in our bodies, has two major components to it, you might say. One is in the bloodstream, humoral they call it, the humoral system. That's the one that reacts immediately to any foreign antigen that comes into your body. So, okay. Then the second one is one that is adaptive. That's one that you develop with time. In other words, you develop antibodies with time. And there's a couple of different types of antibodies, the ones that are immediate and the ones that are a little longer range, which is what they're talking about now with the vaccines. And so you've got the antigen, which is now a virus, that COVID virus, or flu, or any other virus, basically, and you've got the antibody to that particular virus or to a protein component of that virus. So that's basically what we're going to talk about today. What's the difference between a vaccination and immunization? Well, vaccination is actually the injection of a vaccine into your body. That's a vaccination. And what is immunization? Immunization is your ability then to activate that immune system to fight that particular infection. That's immunization. So there are two different concepts, basically. So what type of vaccines are out there? Well, first of all, you have inactivated vaccine. In other words, what they've done to the offending agent itself is they've neutralized or inactivated that particular virus, bacteria, whatever it happened to be. So inactivated. Now there's a couple of different types of inactivated vaccines that are on the market. And one is against tetanus toxoid, for example. That's a good example of an inactivated type of vaccine. What other vaccines do we have? Well, we also have live attenuated vaccine. In other words, the vaccine has been altered. The offending agent has been altered so that it no longer produces the disease in your body, but it still retains the ability to be an antigen so it can stimulate your immune system. So get that clear. Live inactivated. Many of the vaccines that are on the market are live attenuated vaccines. The only thing about the live attenuated vaccines, however, you usually have to get several in order to build up immunity. And that's just like the COVID vaccine, for example. One injection will probably give you about 50-55% immunity. Now, remember, that they were always telling us, if we can develop 50%, that's pretty good. Yeah, baloney. They're telling us now that the present ones are giving us 94-95%. Not bad. But you don't get that with one vaccine injection only. You need to get 2 COVID vaccines to get to that 94-95%. Okay? So that's a live attenuated type of vaccine. What other types? Well, we have a polysaccharide type as well. Now, the polysaccharide is really just a long-chain sugar. And what they do is they attach that sugar to the molecule of inactivated virus or whatever the particle happens to be. And they use that then to stimulate the immune system. That polysaccharide will make that immune system work more efficiently, and you'll have a much stronger vaccine. Examples of that are the 2 pneumonia vaccines that are out there. Also the meningococcal vaccine that's out there as well. And finally, we have what's called the recombinant type of vaccines. Now, the recombinant type they're more recent on the market, and they require an alteration of the gene. In other words, you have to have some gene editing in order to develop that particular type of vaccine. Many of these vaccines now don't use the live virus anymore. What they do is they take one of the protein components in the shell, if it happens to be a virus. Remember, a virus is not a cell. The virus just has an envelope around it. That's it. And they will still take that protein, like for example with the COVID, they'll take this protein off one of those spikes. There's several proteins on the spike, but they take that spike protein or the protein in the envelope around that virus. And so they will take that. That will be the antigen, and they will then go ahead and use that antigen to stimulate antibody production in the body. Now we're going one step further now. Now that we have the technology to do it, especially the 2 new ones now, the ones that are going to go onto the market from Pfizer and Moderna, they use what they call a messenger RNA. Now, what is the messenger RNA? Well, you know our DNA, and I hope everybody knows you got DNA in the nucleus in your cells. All your cells have that DNA in it that came from your mother and your father. That DNA is a blueprint of how to build protein. Now remember, our cells are turning over all the time. All the cells are turning over. So you have different cells, a month from now, for example, than you had now. So you've got to be able to take that blueprint, and you've got to be able to copy the blueprint and get that blueprint that RNA, which actually takes some of that DNA, takes a picture of it, basically messenger RNA, delivers it down the line, and eventually you wind up with new protein in all of the cells in your body like that. So they use that mRNA. So you'll see that term in the vaccine literature. Okay, so let's go on from there. What type of vaccines now should we as seniors be getting? So let me get my little page up about the vaccines, and we're going to go on to talk about that. So first of all, I mentioned tetanus. We should every 10 years get a tetanus toxoid vaccine. It also comes in a larger preparation, which combines it with the pertussis vaccine as well. So that is called the DTAP. The AP just means that it's a modified pertussis, which makes it a little less likely to cause side effects. So that tetanus shot, you probably, if you haven't had a pertussis shot in a while, probably get the TDAP instead of just the toxoid. So every 10 years, you got to get your tetanus shot. Well, tell me now, how long has it been now since we probably had the original disease? I know I did because, when somebody had chickenpox down the street, you ran over, talked with the kid for a half hour, and came home, got the disease. That disease gave you your immunity. You were exposed to the antigen, you got the immunity. Not the most desirable way to get it, but it worked. It worked. We're still alive. We're still doing well. And our immunity seems to be persisting. A good thing. It's a good thing. But there's some vaccines that don't persist, and you need a booster shot every now and then, maybe every 10 years or whatever. So, and that's an unknown now about the COVID vaccine. We don't know if you're going to need a booster or not, or when you're going to need a booster. So, at any rate, what are the other vaccines that are out there for seniors now? Well, let's talk about the shingles shot. The original shingles shot came out in 2012. That's Zostrix. And it did pretty well. It did pretty well. It gave us good immunity. But, for example, I take me as an example because, let's face it, you live from your experiences. I wound up about a year later having a case of shingles. Well, I said, well, how'd that happen? Well, you can get shingles. Even though you had the vaccine, you can still get it. But fortunately, I didn't get the neuropathy that sometimes gets associated with the shingles. Severe pain with it. And I can attest to that too. So at any rate, the Zostrix did fine. Maybe about 60%, 70% effective. Then they came onto the market now with the newer form, the Shingles. Now you need 2 shots of the Shingles, and they come several months apart, but you need 2 shots. That will give you about 90% immunity. Again, it will not prevent you from getting shingles. Remember that. You're not going to be 100% able to fight off every shingles or old chickenpox, basically, that can cause you to have the infection. But it will have a major effect on whether you get the neuropathy or not. Should you get the the Shingles? Probably should. Roughly a third of us are going to wind up with shingles. A third. And certainly it's more prevalent in the elder population. So consider getting the Shingles shots, I should say. The flu vaccine. Should you get the flu vaccine? Well, unfortunately, you got to get it every year. And what happens is that this committee will meet at the end of the flu season, and they will determine all of the different varieties of flu that affected you that year, and they will then put that into the new vaccine that's coming out for the year. I just read a very interesting article. What they are trying to do now, instead of using the protein, remember the flu vaccine has these H and N, the hemagglutinin protein, which is on the cell surface of the flu, the virus. And that H one, the head of that is the protein that is the antigen that the antibodies are produced against. Now they're trying to use the stem of the hemagglutinin to get a more permanent type of vaccine. And it seems promising that using that instead, we might be able to avoid getting our flu shots every year. But unfortunately, this year you need to get it. How effective is it? Depends on who you listen to. If you listen to the manufacturer, well, we're 60% effective. That was BS last year, because the very first wave of flu that hit last year was not covered by the vaccine. So basically, it's more in the range of 20 to 30% effective last year. Still, you don't want to get the flu either. So get your flu vaccine this year. No problem whatsoever getting that. The pneumonia vaccines, remember, they're the kind that originally one was for kids, one was for adults. Now, we need, as seniors, you need both. You need both. So you need the Prevnar vaccine, and you also need the second pneumonia dose as well. One covers 23, the other covers 13 varieties of pneumonia. Okay, but remember, the pneumonia vaccine only is against the bacteria that have that special coating on it. That's it. Okay, so what type of pneumonia does COVID cause? Not, unfortunately, that type. So the pneumonia vaccine will not protect you against the pneumonia that you get, either with the flu or with COVID. So, okay. What other things can we get? Well, we can get booster shots. Like I said, there are sometimes you begin to lose your immunity, or what they sometimes will recommend for you, if you have, say, a grandchild coming in and into your household, they may have you get a booster shot of the MMR, the measles. You don't want that child to get measles. So they may recommend that you get that as well. They may even recommend that you get a hepatitis B booster as well. What other stuff is out there that we should consider? I wouldn't get a hepatitis C vaccine unless you were in the high-risk group. Now, what is a high-risk group? Well, people who will have sex with the same male, female. There are people who inject to get a high, for example, so they're drug abusers. People who are going into incarceration, where there's a high level of hepatitis C, and very, very risky. You might consider hepatitis C. And the only other high-risk group would be, say, the dialysis group as well. Or if you got major amounts of blood transfusion, usually before 1992. 1992 is when they started to test all of the blood for Hep C as well. Should you consider getting anything else? Well, you need to get the COVID vaccine. Let me tell you a little bit about the COVID vaccines. We know quite a bit about both the Pfizer and the Moderna. And what they're not telling you, and I think it's purposely not telling you, that it's not a piece of cake. You need 2 vaccines, usually 3 to 4 weeks apart. So 2 injections. Are there side effects to the injections? Well, they say, oh, but you're not going to get any. It's not going to kill you. Well, that's very satisfying. It's not going to kill me. But tell me, what are the side effects of getting that vaccine? Well, roughly, I'd say probably about 50%. That's high, 50% of seniors, and I'm talking seniors now, 50% will have some significant side effects. What are the side effects? Well, chills, fever, 102, 102.5, headache, muscle aches, nausea, vomiting. Many of these will keep you in bed for a day. Fortunately, all of these, after a day or 2, will abate. So I guess it is better than a senior getting the COVID disease. But remember, it's not totally safe. So especially after that second dose that you may get, especially after that, plan for that next day not to go out and do some things. Don't plan all your stuff the day after you get your injection. You may wind up being in bed with that mild, quotes, milder case of COVID. Okay, so that's a little bit about that. A little bit about the flu as well. So let me tell you a few things now about some of the testing that we do now for COVID. And the reason I'm telling you about that is because you need to know what it is that is the good test, what is a bad test, how effective are the tests. Well, the most common test that we use is basically the one that does the swab now in the nasal pharynx, or just nasal alone. That's probably as accurate as you're going to get. But a lot of these tests now, and again, it's not mentioned in the press, but I look upon a test, what is the sensitivity and what is the specificity of the test? What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, the sensitivity. If you have the disease, will the test come out positive? That's it. So a positive test with a positive disease, that is the sensitivity of the test. You may get a false negative and still have the disease. So just because you have a negative test does not mean you don't have the disease 100%. I usually would advocate getting that repeated in a week. That would then raise your chances of being closer to that 100%. Now, you'll see some testing sites that will say, well, 100% sensitivity, 100% specificity. That is total BS. They don't know what they're talking about. Absolutely no idea what they're talking about. So anytime you see that, don't even bother. It's not even bother arguing about it. So that's the sensitivity. What does the specificity mean? That means if you are negative, your test will be negative. Now, are there many false positives when you're negative? Well, fortunately, with the present test, which is called the reverse transcriptase polymer chain reaction test. So what is the sensitivity of it? Well, it varies. It varies. First of all, with how well they took the test. In other words, how they did it, first of all. If you just take some spit, for example, it's not going to be that accurate. If they're going to run it quickly, not going to be as accurate. In other words, there's a lot of false negatives with that particular test. Sometimes, like for example in China, it was up to 30%. So, but the specificity is high. That's 90+% of that particular test. What other tests are there? Now, that was only about that, what they call RT-PCR. That's the major test that's been done. There's also antibody tests that they run. That's that rapid test. We'll give you a result in 15 minutes. Well, that's fine. It tells you if you had a particular antibody to the virus. Well, again, that has a fair number of false negatives if you have the disease. Fair number. Again, maybe 20 to 30%. The specificity, however, is much better. That is probably 85 or so percent. So that's not bad, not bad. But the test you want to get to see if you have the disease is that RT-PCR, which is called a molecular test. That's the one that you want. And it takes usually a day or two to get your report. Very good. So we also have that antibody test, and now we also have antigen tests that are specific now for the spike protein on the virus or for the envelope around the virus. Remember, the virus itself is not a cell. The virus cannot live. It cannot replicate unless it's in a human cell or an animal cell, depending on what it infects. And so remember that. So depending on what type of test you get, we will have, sometime in the future, we will have a test that'll tell you if you have continued immunity or not. Because there are cells in our body, these lymphocytes, that are the old B cell lymphocytes. They're the ones that produce the immunoglobulins, the B cells, the lymphocyte. They also can produce the longer range type of immunity that people can have as well. We're going to have tests that'll tell that in the future. We don't right now, but we will in the future. So that basically, in a nutshell, is a little bit about the testing and the reasons for the test and why and what kind of test should you get. So I started all this off telling you about the seniors and all, and I think that all seniors should get the vaccine. But remember, once you get that second dose especially, but also the first, once you get that second dose, don't plan a big activity day the day after, okay? This is Dr. C. I hope you've learned a little bit today, and have a nice day.